Secret or I fell upon secret or I fall upon
No matter how many times people recommend them to me, I just can't seem to get into games like Stardew Valley and Animal Crossing. If the pitch is that they're cute and cozy, I agree, they absolutely are. But that's not really enough for me for some reason. Probably the same reason that just being dark and violent doesn't necessarily equate to much of a hook either. A vibe does not always translate into a mechanical experience that's satisfying. For me, cozy farming and community builders often feel like they take far too long for not enough narrative or mechanical payoff. I'm vibing, but what am I accomplishing? Progress is incrementally slow to eventually arrive at a position where my farm or my little town or whatever is just the way I wanted at last. And then it's time to stop playing the game and do something else. I become very aware of the time cost of what I'm doing and kind of sour on the title in a way that more narrative, traditionally immersive games do not provoke. I crave something else, some kind of deeper hook. Cult of the Lamb surprised the hell out of me because I always assumed it was just an adorably satanic variation on this established subgenre, which it is, but it's also leaner, meaner, and faster than so many other titles like it. Cult of the Lamb completely hooked me from the start by taking elements I love about dark fantasy and riffing on them using common tropes from lighthearted, deliberately cutesy farming sims. It makes the vibe unique. So often there is a tendency in media to take something optimistic and bright and try to put a tarnish on it, to try and make fairy tales adult with sex, violence, whatever else that creates that record scratch, ain't your dad so-and-so impression. Cult of the Lamb does the opposite. It takes violence, cannibalism, sex magic, and more, and then softens these things to the point where it's all pretty much goofing around. What's deliberately satanic and gothic about Cult of the Lamb, and it's quite a bit, just intensifies what makes it so fucking cute. Mechanically, this is reflected by the fact that the game is basically a 50-50 split between a combat loop and a crafting loop. The community building aspect feels, to me, slightly secondary to going off on roguelike crusades into forests and swamps, but it's only secondary by the slimmest of margins, and some players might easily flip their priorities from one side of the game to the other. The loops themselves are so tight that they remain fun even into deep repetition. More than that, though, is that Cult of the Lamb is structured around a narrative with a definitive endpoint. There is an arc of action, not just a point of terminal satisfaction that's different for each player. If my problem with the subgenre usually boils down to the fact that I'm hyper-aware of how I'm just playing to play, a self-justifying loop of video game logic, Cult of the Lamb circumvents this feeling by creating a greater sense of forward momentum than these games often do, by making each aspect of the gameplay loop feels like it progresses the whole. It's not just about owing money to a raccoon, it's about taking your place as a new god by destroying the pantheon that was there before you. It's about the meek inheriting the earth by way of a supernatural hat that turns into weapons. And it's also about farming resources with a bunch of animal friends while cultivating their friendships. Of course, what you do with that friendship is up to you, and that's where the fun really begins. You start the game by dying. The last sacrificial lamb sacrificed to the 4 bishops of the old religion. There's a prophecy that a lamb will bring them all down one day, so they've taken to killing every one of your kind. But, as the last, your soul is presented to the one who waits, who takes it in exchange for the power of his crown. So far, so satanic, but the art style really takes it beyond these basic tropes and elevates them into something really distinct. It's not edgy, it's right on the borderline, refusing to cross into grimdark territory. Instead, Cult of the Lamb is colorful, vibrant, animated in a way that's beyond what could be portrayed as a storybook, while still cultivating a storybook feel. Selling your soul at the beginning of the game is neither dark nor just a joke. It feels serious in a way that's as intriguing as it is silly. It is not really fair to say that Cult of the Lamb is a story-driven game, but the story does provide a huge amount of structure, a remarkable frame on which to pin the many interlocking gameplay loops. The main quest is to defeat the 4 bishops and on-chain the one who waits. There are very few twists and turns, certainly none that someone paying attention wouldn't see coming. The lore, though, the background of the game, and the personalities of its inhabitants are extremely well characterized and presented. The script writing is tight, just enough to build interest, not enough to overwhelm or muddy the focus on atmosphere and mood. Harrow the Owl is the main lore master, but the bishops themselves are the ones who primarily tell the story as they taunt you or give up their secrets in defeat. No one speaks English, it's all just melodic gibberish a la The Sims and Simlish, which allows the voice acting to carry the tone of the dialogue and never the actual content, letting the player's imagination do the more heavy lifting. My favorites are the bird vendors, Clownek the seer, Kudai the blacksmith, and Kemek the flesh weaver, all connected to something mechanical in the gameplay loop. Clownek's appearances give players tarot cards, modifiers to the crusade, that give a player new abilities or extra health. Long past the point that I would read the repeating dialogue, the sound of Clownek's voice still makes me feel engaged and invested in the setting. Kudai's personality isn't big, but getting to swap weapons mid-run is an important part of making them feel continually fresh, to help keep monotony from settling into a repeatable process. Kemek, though. Kemek is like a weird, sacrilegious inverse of the Lamb, with false followers made of bagged-up body parts, wearing a crown it made for itself from bits and pieces of other beings. These relics are powerful, room-clearing or run-altering magical artifacts that can only be used once or infrequently throughout a given crusade. The effects of the relics are often exciting and dramatic, made more compelling by how they're kind of a dark and evil magic assembled out of Kemek's victims. The voice work is menacing in how manic the delivery is. It's the game's ratio of traditional horror to cartoon whimsy dialed up even further to greater levels of contrast. Kemek is, in miniature, what works about Cult of the Lamb. It is sometimes effectively disturbing, even creepy, and it does this without ever diminishing or pulling focus from the aspects of it that are kind of adorable. Making body horror cutesy is a hell of a hat trick, maybe the most significant one in a game whose combat loop is literally built on performing hat tricks. Cult of the Lamb takes most of the main quest to introduce its mechanics one by one so as not to overwhelm the player. There's a lot to juggle, but it never seems overcomplicated once everything stacks together. Instead, everything is very clear with its cause and its effect. Hunger is constant, it goes up with population. Sickness is indicative of a player's attentiveness to upkeep. Both of those things interact where cleaning up everybody's shit provides fertilizer to grow crops, solving or mitigating the hunger problem. Solving material shortages can be accomplished by sending followers on dangerous missions, but risk of death is high, and death can cause sanitation issues. Cult of the Lamb, mechanically, is visually and numerically explicit about how everything interacts, always explaining what is put at risk for a given game. The fact that consequences are so frequent is part of what makes the world feel immersive. These are strange, powerful magics. Raising the dead is not half as interesting without the gamble to see if the followers come back wrong. If they do, they'll eat your other followers, exacerbating the death problem and likely setting a player back more than they were before the resurrection was attempted. The combat is similar in how it presents simple, straightforward, risk-reward propositions. Each room in the small 10 to 12 room mazes has either a combat encounter or a positive interaction where you gain abilities or items. The enemies all have predictable behavior and well-telegraphed attack patterns. The main danger is just being scatterbrained about it. It can be a lot of movement on the screen at once, and so being clumsy is more of a problem than an individual enemy and their easily mitigated attacks. Each room takes just seconds, never more than a minute. In a crusade, there are usually 2 or 3 mazes, and the total time investment for running the whole mix of mazes and bonus rooms is 8 to 12 minutes. 4 minutes a maze. If you're being thorough, you can do a crusade much faster if you hurry. The crusades give you a lot of resources, so there's a feeling of coming up a great deal in a short period of time. A really nice little spike of accomplishment that makes it easy to say yes to another loop, another 12 minutes, and then your afternoon is long over and it's hard to account for exactly where all the time went. What prevents a player from doing crusades in an endless loop is that all time in the game passes at once. So the more time spent on crusades, the lower your hunger gauge goes, the higher the sickness gauge goes, the more likely it is that death and descent will sweep through your cult. So in that case, the value proposition is that the more resources you make, the more resources you will have to spend to recover your lead and make the cult ready for the next crusade. This mandatory downtime between crusades is actually a huge component of what prevents them from becoming too monotonous. It redirects a player's focus and energy every so often so that there is anticipation and necessity for the next big delivery of resources. The way the main plot keeps adding game mechanics one by one ensures that the period spent back at camp only becomes complicated and time-consuming once a player has significantly invested in the whole endeavor. They have gotten to know their followers, they have built all the basic buildings and customized their cult with doctrine selections and decorative elements. Only then does the game become difficult. Only then does the game offer consequences, after a player has built up enough choices to make those consequences feel personal. I think that mechanical friction and pushback is a major part of why the tone works so well. It is not so concerned with being adorable that it won't get the claws out. The presence of the claws is what makes the cute stuff so damn funny, so disarming. The murder, mayhem, and endless poops are just the way the world works, and it works the same for you as it does for the followers who worship at your little cloven feet. The biggest mechanical hurdle was, for me, the consequences of all this passing time. Old age sets in kind of quickly among your followers, putting all the time and attention you spend cultivating relationships with these individual followers at risk. This is where the different choices in doctrine really come into play. All of them provide differently weighted solutions to the more complicated mechanical problems that the game throws at you. Like hunger when the food reserves run low. You can choose to have your cult trend towards vegetarianism, which removes the penalty from eating meals made of grass. Grass is the game's most overwhelmingly common resource, so this is genuinely quite helpful. But the meal itself is meager, thin. Look at your flock and consider, why are you letting all this prime meat just sit around? Trending towards cannibalism instead allows you to make meals from follower meat without the penalty. And that meal not only fills the hunger meter higher than the grass by a considerable margin, it also increases the loyalty of those who remain to feast. Kindness and cruelty within Cult of the Lamb create two different sorts of resource economies. Followers can be leveled up from levels 1 to 10, and at the highest level they produce the most devotion during sermons and the best crusade bonuses when temporarily turned into demons. It's very worth cultivating these relationships and leveling up your followers, and I spent a lot of resources bringing my best followers back from the dead over and over again so that I could hang on to those bonuses. And for sentimental reasons. There's something very amusing to me about hanging on to the first followers I ever got, even though they all died of old age like 4 times by the time I was done with Cult of the Lamb. You're not done yet, little buddy. Your soul is mine. However, my wife got really into the game and was playing it on her Nintendo Switch, so I got to see the parallel economy in action. By continually recruiting and sacrificing followers, a player comes out ahead faster and more dramatically. The increased loyalty from followers practicing cannibalism helps balance out the loyalty lost through the constant churn and burn of followers. In this way, compassion is the path of smaller gains and longer-term rewards. There is a definite sense of having given up important bonuses in exchange for the well-being of your woodland friends. Bribery will get you everywhere with those greedy little creatures. But you are the last lamb on your predestined path to godhood. What is the worth of friendship in the face of what the dark divine powers of the world will offer in exchange for their tasty, tasty flesh? There are so many nasty, evil little bargains to make with sinister figures throughout the world. There's a character to whom you can offer up your followers and he will pour molten gold over them, turning them into agonized statues for his collection. You can sacrifice followers for meat. You can sacrifice them for devotion. You can sacrifice them to collect sin. You can sacrifice them by lying to them, telling them that they are ascending to a higher plane of existence, and then once they get there, the gore of their little bodies rains down in chunks over the stunned congregation, which is, itself, oddly endearing. No matter how dark the subject matter is, the actual tone is always lighthearted. It's a hilarious and thin tightrope to walk, and Cult of the Lamb walks it effortlessly with all the little oohs and ahs your followers make as they witness the wrath of the Lamb. They love it. They can't get enough of it. And many of them are a little freaky too, which adds another endearing edge. They'll ask to do the strangest things. Some of them want to be sacrificed. Some of them want to literally eat shit, even though it will make them sick. Some of them want to marry you. As cult leader, you can marry whoever you please, and this marriage will provide even more resources should you decide to sacrifice your spouse later. Not all of these mechanics were in the game originally. Sin, in particular, was added after the fact, a late-game resource which really only affects cosmetic changes by upgrading your temple or making little outfits for your followers. But without Sin, you wouldn't have this hilarious Rite of Lust ceremony where someone gets to be crowned the May Queen and everyone takes the day off work to frolic naked. The inverse is the Rite of Wrath, where your followers take their pent-up anger out on your structures, tearing shit up and generating sin that way. They even added a little rhythm minigame to generate sin, where your followers get frustrated with you if you can't drum to the beat. Cult of the Lamb is absolutely jam-packed with fun stuff to do, and none of it takes very long at all, not even these little minigames and ceremonies. Everything a player needs to do in their cult can be done in around, 10 minutes, about the same average amount of time a player spends crusading. Sometimes one aspect of the game will be longer or shorter, but the two mechanical halves orbit each other in remarkable balance. But I didn't play the game for short amounts of time. I played it in long sessions where I realized at the end that, damn, Cult of the Lamb has got me in a trance. Because I do this for a living now and don't really ever play video games without intending to do a project about them, I have some criteria that has become important to me in narrowing down my choices of games to play. There's too many games for any one person to ever play, and some of them can be such massive time sinks that they really crowd out time for other titles. The main thing I get worried about is a game where I'm playing just to play, where I'm spending hours on something that I can't get a return from, no clear thesis, nothing except a haze of lost time, and the sense that I did enjoy it. I was worried that would be Cult of the Lamb for me, and so it wasn't really on my radar until a friend of mine asked me to try out the co-op mode with him. I was instantly charmed by Cult of the Lamb. The art, the music, the vibe. I just had to go deeper. It's not fair to call Cult of the Lamb a simple game just because its gameplay loops are very lean and streamlined, or because it rearranges familiar elements more often than it comes up with something brand new. The way the various mechanics interact is actually deceptively complex. It takes a tremendous amount of work to create a thing that works intuitively. And while most of the gameplay mechanics are traditional to the subgenres that Cult of the Lamb pulls from, its satanic frame and the tone of everything completely refreshes these tropes, giving the experience a personality that is utterly unique. In some ways, Cult of the Lamb was absolutely the kind of game that I was worried about. Just look at the size of this unlockable building tree. You have to generate devotion by allowing your followers to worship, and can also steal it from a few other shrines to top off the last few points if you need them. It is a very long process of waiting to go up this tech tree, plus discovering blueprints out and about doing crusades. The timing of it is clever though. You aren't meant to wait around for these things. Because all time advances in the game simultaneously, completing a crusade is the perfect interval to go out, do something else, and come back to have an advancement waiting for you. If the bar filled up in a shorter amount of time, there would be a pressure to wait for the bar to fill up and to grab the point instead of crusading. It's a small friction that redirects the player from one game system to another and then back again. Long periods of time spent in the game does indeed pass in a kind of pleasant haze, which is the ironic result of how almost everything in Cult of the Lamb can be accomplished relatively quickly. One task just kind of softly blends into the next. There is always some sort of expense that needs paying, and so there is never a time when there is nothing to do or no pressure that needs addressing. The game isn't bloated with time-wasting things. In fact, it's the opposite. The feeling of having achieved or accomplished something, even if it's small, comes so quickly and so constantly that the sensation of having done right by the time investment never abates. I've covered a lot of games for the story, or for the genre, or just the immersion factor. Rarely do I pick something just because it's fun, because it's fun makes for a short-ass video essay. But that's kind of the whole reason to recommend Cult of the Lamb. It's really, really fun, and that's enough. It's impressive to create something that can provoke fun so easily and for so long. Something that's just as charming at hour 20 as hour 2, even though by hour 2 you've seen most of how it's going to be for the rest of your playthrough. I don't know if I would have enjoyed Cult of the Lamb as much if it went on infinitely, but I put almost 30 hours into it, and that is far more than I expected. Ultimately, the game had to roll credits on me twice to shoo me out the door. The main ending is simple enough to do. All 4 bishops must die. All 4 chains must be broken. The boss fights are an especially fun part of Cult of the Lamb. There is a much more intense level of grotesquerie to the bosses and how they're drawn than regular enemies, making them kind of distinct from the vibe of the main game, a climactic ugliness that is just fantastic. There are 3 bosses to beat in any given dungeon template before the bishop becomes available, with a bonus boss unlocked after the bishop as a kind of epilogue encounter to encourage a player to run the set again. In the main game, all the bosses, except the bishops, become small and cute again once they're defeated. You can make them part of your cult. I loved that touch particularly. This giant creature that's so intimidating and weird is also, at the same time, just a little guy who snores and poops. Having all the bosses come to worship you after you kick their ass feels awfully flattering. It's nice to see them down there in the congregation with all the more traditional woodland types of creatures. The boss fights are also mechanically tough enough to really draw out the various advantages of the build you put together through the tarot cards and the weapons you find. It takes all you've got, and that mechanical climax is deeply satisfying. After defeating a bishop and being showered with resources because of it, All your followers gather around to gawk and celebrate your victory. Call to the Lamb gives you small victories all the time, so it's important to make the big victories seem impressive. After all of these victories, it is time to return to the one with whom you made the pact in the first place, the one who waits. To be free, he needs one last sacrifice. You. You can allow this to happen, but I don't know where that would lead because it is so obviously the incorrect choice. The sacrificial lamb died at the very beginning of the game. This sheep don't get sheared no more. Resistance leads to a multi-stage boss fight, first with the two henchmen, then the one who waits, and then a desperate and disfigured version of the one who waits once the first health bar is done away with. The one who waits was once, like you, just another ambitious animal named Narinder. He too conquered the four bishops, taking from them the things that made them special. The greatest part of the triumph is getting to decide what you will do with Narinder. Will you do unto him as he did unto you, or will you take him in as a follower, bending him to worship you like he did to the bishops? It's a great moment and a fine climax. But do you have to be done with the game? Why have Narinder as a follower if you aren't going to spend any time with him? This is where the extensive post-game comes into play. You kill the four bishops, again, this time with feeling. There are new items that allow for new plot interactions and make the doctrinal choices you were locked out of the first time around open up. Essentially, it's closer to a New Game Plus than it is a meaningfully different campaign. But this post-campaign play is where exploring the world and having fun with it is the sole focus. No more tutorializing, no more big reveals, just unlocking what was left to be unlocked and experimenting with what seems enjoyable to try out. Prime cozy hours for Cult of the Lamb. But even though there isn't much plot left to go, some of my favorite moments are in this epilogue portion. This time, the bishops can be recruited to become followers. In doing so, you open up a questline to return them to the temples you fought them in, and reunite them with the thing that Narinder took from them so long ago. They reflect on time passing, things changing, on how nothing is ever really as permanent as it seems. The Lamb is the new god of death. The old religion is shattered. The world turns. Being healed, moving on from what they were, the bosses accept the change, even uncomfortable change. It's a kind of character development that most narrative-driven games would never bother including for their villains. To have that hidden so deep in the mostly mechanical post-game experience made finding these remarkable little moments of narrative shine even brighter. The script is sparse, but extremely effective. Most of the activity in the game revolves around combat and follower management, but it is the characters that stand out most in my mind after having finished. While crusading and cult management are the two halves of the game, there is an entire constellation of optional areas with strange creatures who have minigames on offer. These areas and encounters rarely take significant time away from the main game modes, instead offering more of a palate-cleansing break where a player gets to dive a little deeper into the storybook aesthetic. One of the first characters you encounter is Rathow, who helps explain the state of the world and then introduces you to a dice game called Knucklebones. It's actually pretty fun for a dice game. I've played an awful lot of 10,000 drunk with my in-laws, and I feel like Knucklebones is a much faster, funner, more competitive dice experience. As you crusade, you meet Rathow's friends, one by one, who all come over to his house to play Knucklebones and become increasingly difficult opponents with increasingly valuable rewards if you beat them. A dock and a lighthouse down by the shore has a minigame that can help get a player out of a starvation situation by allowing players to fish. A ritual you can research can double the amount of fish you receive, creating a nice little stockpile of food as a buffer against hunger as you're out crusading for different sorts of resources, or sending your missionaries on tasks other than meat runs. The fisherman is, of course, a fish who is disguised as a man. There's a little questline about restoring the lighthouse, generating extra devotion for the early game, not really enough to be useful for the late game. There's also a mushroom church led by a stone-cold weirdo named Sozo, who will offer up all sorts of little prizes if you bring him more of his precious fungus. Sozo actually is a great example of how integrated things within Cult of the Lamb really are. He gives you a ritual that allows you to use mushrooms to brainwash your followers, locking faith at maximum for 2 whole days. It also gives your missionaries bonuses because they're so focused. This allows the player to do all sorts of moves that would be deeply unpopular otherwise. It takes the pressure off for the next 2 crusades, knowing faith will not decrease while you're away. The ritual is a key game mechanic, but you've got to explore and experiment and talk to the characters. Sozo dies at the end of the main campaign, but he leaves a mushroom behind from which you can regrow him as a follower in your camp during the post-game. He will ask you to rescue his old followers, but if you do, he'll just eat them and then repeat the quest. I found this annoying, so I refused him. He began to dissent immediately, so I put him in the stocks and re-educated him. And by doing so, the mushroom withered and fell off his head. He became Dr. Sezonius and said that the last thing he remembers was staring at a delicious-looking mushroom. I had inadvertently and accidentally healed and rehabilitated the old doctor. It's such a fun, crazy surprise to bury so deep. I really respect how willing Cult of the Lamb is to let players explore on their own, not directing their attention deliberately to every little thing. Even allowing the obviously evil Midas to turn my followers to gold has its role in unlocking special features, in this case for pieces of a talisman that can be traded in for special lamb outfits, all of them offering significant positive and negative attributes that can change the character of the combat and nature of its challenge during crusades. You can defeat those bonus Watcher bosses and get the same talismans from an old smuggler a ways up the coast, so if you're playing a nice cult leader, you don't have to interact with Midas at all. There is an alternative. Or you can just do both quests and reap double the rewards. The Watchers even reset after defeating the one who waits, so you get more fragments of the talisman. Even if the post-campaign epilogue content is mostly just more of the same, there's enough novelty in there for it to feel like a continuous, evolving part of the game, and not just content for the sake of content. I wanted to stay in this world for a while longer. I wanted to bask in being the god of death that I had spent the campaign becoming. When the game rolled credits on me the second time, I was willing to be done. There truly wasn't anything new at that point except for some lingering secrets and small interactions. In one way, most of the 20+ hours I spent was on frivolous things, room after similar room of combat, fishing minigames that could be part of any old game, unlocking tech trees slowly over time like in dozens of other titles. But I actually feel like all of that stuff that sounded generic when I was just reading about it on the Steam store page genuinely contributed to a much more creative, surprising whole. Cult of the Lamb is a great game, but the point is not simply just to play. The point is to explore, to learn, to immerse yourself in a strange world. Same as any 100-hour RPG would, or any big-budget story-driven action title, or most of the kind of games I would ordinarily cover on my channel. The only thing I wouldn't actually recommend about Cult of the Lamb would be the DLC, unless the object was just to support the developer. The majority of the DLC are only cosmetic, adding decorations and follower forms. There are so many of those things in the base game already, and the DLCs don't add very much individually. Only as a full set do they really feel like a significant expansion on the release content. The upside of this is that nothing mechanical is hidden behind DLC. Everything that affects crusades or progression is part of the base game and fully accessible to all players. These DLCs are really just for enthusiasts, fans. The only one of them that really mixes it up is the Pilgrim DLC because it adds an interactive comic book as well. Pilgrim's tone is perfectly consistent with the balance of sour and sweet that the game itself has. It follows, as the title suggests, two pilgrims looking for a hidden paradise away from the reach of the old religion. The enemies are given dialogue and a sense of presence that the main game just doesn't give to them at all. It actually heightens my sense of how this world works to see it portrayed this way in the comic. What's especially interesting about the comic, I've realized, is that the way it mixes cute things with violent things is very different from the kind of stuff that I grew up with in the early internet era. It used to be that this juxtaposition was almost always more violent than cute. Like, I vividly remember someone telling me that Happy Tree Friends would be the funniest shit I've ever seen. I didn't feel that way about it, but Happy Tree Friends does leave an impression. It's ultra-gory slapstick that's like kind of an ultimate fulfillment of the kind of vibe The Simpsons made fun of with Itchy and Scratchy. The jokes don't see anything in terms of plot or character, they just see plot and character as a vessel for delivering the most absurdist mayhem possible. I don't know if it's fair to say Happy Tree Friends operated on shock value because everyone who watched it knew what they wanted out of it, and thusly none of it was shocking, really. The bloodier the death, the bigger the goof. That was the way the humor operated. So much of the early internet era's interest in merging the adorable and the horrific was rooted in making the cute part seem kind of stupid, that it was a sign of being a real grown-up if you liked blood and guts and tits and such. This was, after all, the era that gave us Maddox. There was this kind of teenage insistence on distinguishing soft shit from hard shit, blending them only as a way of reinforcing the differences between the perspectives. It has been exciting to see media that's grown so far beyond that tired, limited dynamic. Cult of the Lamb's blend does not separate what's horrible from what's adorable. It does not make jokes based on distinguishing one from another. It makes jokes based on creating a world that is both things simultaneously and seriously. Cult of the Lamb has sympathy for its characters, even when they are just sacrifices in the ritual. That pervasive sense of every creature being little guys with hopes and dreams is actually what makes the ritual sacrifice hit the way it does, what makes it so funny. These creatures live in this world, and that's just the way it is sometimes. In the Pilgrim comic, there's this wonderful sequence where you can encounter Kemok, the mad creator of relics. Kemok's chapter in the comic is straight up horror. It follows the emotions and expectations of the horror genre to the letter. It is not a deconstruction of genre, but a clever reconstruction, coming at it from an unusual artistic angle to produce an unusual result. Cult of the Lamb does not hold itself cynically above its component elements. It embraces them all with total sincerity. The sincerity doesn't detract from the humor. It acts as an intensifier. It makes the punchlines more robust when they land. And it allows the more serious, somewhat contemplative parts to exist as they are without seeming hollow within a world where nothing actually matters. On the contrary, cruelty and kindness matter a great deal. And your mastery of both is what makes being the Holy Lamb, God of Death, such a big deal. Cult of the Lamb is part of a tradition of style that kind of goes back to Jeff Smith's comic series Bone when it debuted in 1991, but Cult of the Lamb is so confident and unique in its art style and personality that it feels like something substantially new. As the real world becomes darker, I think there is less of an impulse to take a position of being above all the mayhem and confusion, apart from it so as to point at it and make fun. There is more of a pull towards sympathy with the subjects of a world's chaos and brutality. And what is horror, if not finding catharsis in the grotesque? We want to be cozy, peaceful in a world of never-ending chaos and violence. So when that big maw opens up to drag him down to hell, the punchline isn't to laugh at these creatures, but to shake your head and say, "Buddy, I know just how you feel." Thanks for watching.
Sayat mga kalama, tsaka lang payaman ka. Payanak ka na palaman ka. Payaman na saka.
Yeah.